間啦。
Members, good morning. We formed a quorum and it's also the appointed time. May I call to order meeting of the Welfare Services Panel. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss the effectiveness of the Working Family Allowance Scheme for low-income working families. We've received 4 papers from different deputations on the views of the LIVA. All right. We have scheduled quite a long meeting from now to 2:30. So I will control time very properly, and because of 4 hours is already quite exhausting. Let us welcome representatives from the administration. From the administration, we have Dr. Law Chi Kwong, Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Mr. Gordon Chong, PAS, and also Mr. Asmin Lee, Head of Working Family and Student Financial Assistance Agency. On the 16th of June, there was a motion raised at the Welfare Services Panel meeting. And then after the meeting, 4 motions were proposed, and some members suggested that a public hearing be held, and here we are. And when the administration responds, well, we've already got your paper, so you need only to give a very brief introduction. And can you please tell us what is the position of your motions? We have 4. We are from Mr. Michael Tan, Mr. Kok Wai Kang, and 2 from Ms. Lau Siu Lai. The motions already passed, and of course, it was only passed. They were only passed a short while ago, so we'd like to know whether there is any response from the administration. We just don't want you to ignore them. And then can we invite the administration to give us a short introduction of 5 minutes? Thank you. As you said, Chairman, in June we reported to this panel implementation of low-income working family allowance scheme, or a LIFA scheme. And since its introduction in May last year, we have made some improvements, such as abolition of the absence rule, and then operational-wise, we like to simplify the application form to make it easier for applicants. And then we have also sent staff to different offices to answer inquiries. The administration is conducting a comprehensive policy review on the scheme, and we're now analyzing statistics collected by the CNSD. We'd like to know how the scheme would impact on the work motivation and the interrelationship between this scheme and the other social security schemes run by the administration. We intend to further improve the scheme in due course. All the suggestions mentioned in these motions have been included in our policy review. We look forward to hearing views from the deputations and colleagues. Yes, I'm sure. But may I draw attention to the fact that the motion passed on the 12th of June. They were moved by the motions. 4 suggestions from Michael Tian, and suggestions from Kok Wai Kang to lower the income limit, and also requirements on working hours. And Dr. Lau Siu Lai asked that the calculation for children is actually not in line with the calculation of other matters. Anyway, I give the floor to deputations now. May I remind you that we have 65 deputations or individuals, and the first session is from 10:30 to 12:30. A short break of 5 minutes will take us to 12:35, and then we will end at about 2:28 p.m. The meeting will be rather long, so at most I will extend our meeting by 15 minutes to 2:45 p.m. So you have only 3 minutes to speak each, and if you overrun, I will have to ask you to stop. If you need the earpiece and a microphone, channel 0 is the floor, channel 1 Cantonese, channel 2 English, and channel 3 Pudongwa. Read out your speaking order. And for those in the public gallery, may I draw attention to the notes for members of the public attending meetings of committees and in the public gallery. If you need a copy of the notes, our colleagues can give you one, and you may give us written submissions after the meeting or for circulation to members. And oral and written submissions by deputations and individuals are not protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. That means you are liable for your own remarks. Okay, I am done with all the reminders, and without further ado, can I invite from the Labor Affairs Committee of the Catholic Church, Hong Kong Catholic Church, Ms. Law Huishan. 55,000 have benefited under LIFER scheme, and that's a far cry from the original expected beneficiaries of 200,000. Perhaps it's because of the rules, and we've already given our views, but we would like to highlight a few points. The purpose of the scheme is to encourage self-reliance and ease intergenerational poverty. Theoretically speaking, the lower the family income, the more protection should be given. However, there are 2 tiers in the number of working hours under the scheme. So for those working 140, you get about $600, and 120 will be at 12,000. I think the longer you work, the more subsidy you have. This is to encourage self-reliance, but we know that for some workers, in order to be eligible for the higher level of allowance, they have to work very long hours, over 192, and they are not willing to take sick leave even if they're sick, because they don't want to lose their high level of allowance because of taking sick leave. Well, if they work long hours, then the family income may increase and they may fall out of the eligibility net. So we are punishing people willing to work long hours, and this is counterproductive. We don't want workers to work excessively long hours to the fact that they overlook their family duties and to take care of their children. So I think we should draw the line at 44 hours and 36 hours, and we should incorporate all the working hours of members in the same family for the sake of calculation. Well, we know that you cannot both apply for a LIFER and WITS, that is the work incentive travel subsidy. And if you do, then the 600 from LIFER will be from which will be included into the income for application of LIFER. The 2 schemes have different objectives. One is subsidy, and the other is to support the transport needs of working families. The 2 should not be considered together, and so long as an applicant can meet the eligibility criteria of both schemes, he should be granted allowances under both schemes. Thank you. Mr. Peng Xiupan. Thank you. I'm convener from Pro-Community March, Lam Xiupan. It is saddening to be here because, strictly speaking, this council has really lost its credibility and mandate. It should not continue to hold meetings. The government has abused the interpretation, basic law interpretation procedures and disqualified 6 members, and this is very ridiculous. For 6 who have been disqualified, 5 are member of this welfare services panel to defend the rights of the grassroots. I must condemn the whole thing. And the swearing-in ceremony took place in October. Interpretation of the basic law happened in November. Why should you interrupt me? I'm afraid we have to deal with the point of order first. Mr. Gary Chen. Chairman, please clarify. We are now in a public hearing. This is not the forum for political representations by Mr. Lam. Mr. Lam, I think you will come to the subject very soon. 5 members from this panel have been disqualified. I'd like to express my dissatisfaction, and I'm very unhappy with Mr. Gary Chen for interrupting me. And most ridiculous of all is abuse by the NPCSC. So first the rules allowed them to do that, and the interpretation by NPCSC will not allow you to play football with your feet. And once again, I must condemn the government and also the interpretation of the basic law by NPSC. You can disqualify members, but you cannot stop us from speaking here. All right, I return to the subject. How come the scheme doesn't cover 1P families? Isn't there discrimination? I hope Dr. Law can respond. I have not seen similar scenarios in other areas of government policies. Well, how come 1P family can apply for life scheme? According to some media reports, such people can apply for WITS, but this is ridiculous. First, there's a policy from the Labor Department, and which is run by SWD, and which only gives you $600, and life the allowance is different. In 2012, I was a social worker intern, and back then, which was 600, and there's been no adjustment whatsoever. You ask for people living below the poverty line to apply for WITS. This is ridiculous. And what is the policy objective of LIFA? Is it for eradicating poverty or just to give some minor mercies to poor families? Because the level of allowance is so small that you cannot lift people out of poverty. I look forward to a response from the administration. Mr. Lam Ming Yan from the Labour Party. Thank you. LIFA was launched last year, and the hoping to benefit 0.7 million people, but only less than 20,000 have benefited. And I think this is very undesirable because the application procedures are very cumbersome. A person may be a casual worker, and he has different workplaces in 1 month. So is he expected to get a proof of working hours and income proof from 4 or 5 employers? And people find the procedures too cumbersome, and they're deterred. And the income limit is such that people are also deterred. People have the feeling that you have to be poor enough to be eligible. And then the working hour restriction is also very stringent. Many people cannot work 192 hours. They fall short of it by a short margin, and they are not eligible. So perhaps the ceiling can be slightly adjusted. You should lower the ceiling so that more people can benefit. And if all income is incorporated into the calculation, what about working hours? If you can include all the hours, then families can be more flexible in choosing their work time. For instance, the mom and dad can also work at different hours. This will be more flexible for the family. And also the children, the allowance for a child should not be pegged to working hours. So if you have exceeded the limit, then you cannot have full allowance, the full rate. In fact, I think children, I think they should all receive full rate child allowance. Is been implemented for 1 year, and we feel that it's too difficult to be successful. The intention is to help the poor, but there are too many hurdles. Has the administration considered how to ensure that the scheme can achieve its intended objective? Thank you. Ms. Lai Ka-ming from DAB. Thank you. I'm from DAB. The scheme started in 2016. In original, it wanted to benefit 0.7 million people. But as at June this year, only about 120,000 people have benefited, and 52,000 of them are young people or children. This is a far cry from the expectation of the administration. Although the administration has adjusted the measures a number of times, such as removing the absence rule, simplifying the application form, and sending people to be at the Customer Service Center of Lawful Housing Department to help, and it has also commissioned NGOs to help in form filling. But it appears that you have not greatly increased the number of applicants.
On the other hand, a number of groups are not happy about the application threshold, and hopefully the government can make adjustments in order to benefit more people. A meeting was held in June, and a number of legislators made suggestions to enhance LIFA, and hopefully the threshold can be lowered in order to benefit more people. The application period should be relaxed from 6 months, and joint assessment of the working hours of the family members should be considered, and there should be more than 2 tiers of working hours. The income limit should also be relaxed to set it at 75% of MMDHI, and the application procedures should also be streamlined. So hopefully the government can consider that. Another purpose of LIFA is to enhance support to children. In the future review, the government should offer extra subsidies, and there should be a mechanism in place to follow up on children in some families in order to maximize the impacts of LIFA. Currently, there are 2 allowance levels under LIFA. For those who work 192 hours or more a month, the allowance would be $1,000. So the more hours people work, the less time they have for their children. The government should review the child care or after-school respite services in order to allow working parents to work with peace of mind. You should also relax the scope of the high allowance so that the chronically ill and their carers would receive support as well. Ms. Lau Penor, Sheng Shui, LIFA Concern Group, please speak to the microphone. Good morning. I applied for LIFA once. I made 4 applications, but none of them were approved. The procedures were very complicated. My husband is a casual worker, And in November or December 2015, he made an application. And subsequently, a few months later, he was no longer working. And he asked for a pay rise but didn't get it. That's why he resigned. And the government checked his employment status in August the same year. So of course the assessment would not be accurate. We made 4 applications, and at the end I gave up because the procedures were way too complicated, and there were so many restrictions. And the second time we were rejected because my husband only took up casual work and he wasn't always working, and when he was employed and his employer would refuse to sign. So I think we are victimized. The child allowance should not be linked to the number of working hours because children are innocent. I have 2 children. We have made applications for years, and I could not send my children to tutorial classes. My husband could not find work. He only took up jobs here and there, so how can I afford the tuition fees for my children? So the so full subsidy and child allowance should be given, and such allowance should not be linked to the number of working hours. Thank you very much. You talked about the complicated procedures for obtaining a proof of number of working hours, and your husband lost your job. Is that right? He was not in employment between April and August, and the government decided to check on him at that time. So of course they could not find anything. And our applications failed because we could not prove the number of working hours. Of course, my husband could not work 192 hours a month. Yes, we understand you. Yes, we heard you. All right, Ms. Lau, thank you very much. We've heard you. Ms. Yang Kinga from the Cheng Ho Leaver Concern Group. Thank you. Chairman, good morning. I live in Cheng Ho, and I'd like to talk about the joint assessment of working hours. We have 3 people in the family. We are 60 and 61 years old, and I have a grandchild aged 5. We never wanted to apply for CSSA, and we tried to find work. We used to find part-time work, and we could secure WITS. And with the child allowance under LEFA, we wanted to apply. That's why I decided to find work. And a few months later, my husband could not stand it anymore because the child was too noisy, and we could not find work other than cleaning or outdoor work. And my husband has hypertension, and he found it very hard to cope. But then he had to carry on because we had to meet the threshold of 192 hours. In other words, he had to work every single day. I forced him to work for 4 straight months, and he couldn't stand it anymore. I forced him to work because we have no choice. For families like us, if we do not combine our working hours, it's very hard. And for the Secretary, I want to say that this is the third time we make a submission. You can look up my details. I spent a very long time compiling the information with bank accounts, statements, pay slips. Everything was very clear. And I even compiled tables, but they still try to pick holes. And this is the third application already, and every time I had to call to follow up on the application. We were never notified about receipt of our application. Every time we were asked to wait. I'm not sure whether you were trying to make life hard for us, and this is the third application, and now it's still pending. They told us that this application should be all right. The procedures are way too complicated, and the working hours threshold is too high. If we cannot combine our working hours, there's nothing we can do. Ms. Lau. Well, Ms. Lau, they made 4 applications and 3 applications respectively. Ms. Lai Xinping from the Shengshui Qinghuo Lifa Concern Group. Good morning. I live in Qinghuo in Shengshui. I have 2 children, one aged 3 and another 10. My husband has casual work. There's no permanent employment, and his income is unstable. We had applied for LIFA before, but at the beginning we did not know how to apply. My husband thought that he wouldn't receive pay slips as a casual worker, but social workers later told us that we could make an application, but the process was complicated, and we had to submit extra information. Employers refused to sign because they had to provide their point of contact. And since my husband wasn't a casual worker, the employer refused to sign. At that time, we discussed with the employer, and we begged them to sign. And at the end, we managed to apply. But we are still concerned that if the employer refuses to sign in the future, we could no longer apply. Weather would affect the employment of my worker. In June, he had no work because when the rain was heavy, he wouldn't be allowed to work. And sometimes my husband had to try to secure employment elsewhere. Sometimes he was successful, but sometimes not. In that case, he had to wait till the rain stops. And the situation is very passive, and our income is very low. But when we are in difficulties, the government would tell us that we do not work enough hours, so we are really in deep plight. We do not work enough hours, not because we are lazy, but because of the above reasons. I hope the government can lower the working hours threshold, and it would be hard for us to work 20 days a month, so hopefully the threshold can be lowered to 160 hours for the higher allowance. And finally, I think the allowance should not, the child allowance should not be linked to the number of working hours, so that our children wouldn't suffer. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your personal experience. I think we have heard you, and the administration will reply. Next, Ms. Lee Ming-yuk from the Qinghuo Lifa Concern Group. I'm from Qinghuo Estate. I live with my husband and my granddaughter, and our life is very hard. I had to take care of my grandchild, so I cannot work. And we failed to apply for a lot of allowance. We don't even have money to do our groceries. And I had to find the cheapest market source. And the child lacks nutrition, and the allowance is $1,500, and it's not enough to pay for the education of my grandchild. If this continues, well, there would be problems with development problems for my child. For poor students, they lack opportunities. I hope that the allowance would not be linked to the number of working hours, so that grassroots children can learn more. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Even when one is in poverty, the children should not be made to suffer. So the number of working hours should not be linked to the level of allowance. Mr. Ng Chi Fai from the Hong Kong Chef Union. I wanted to say hello, but I just could not utter those words. 4 legislators were disqualified, and they have always been helping the grassroots. They have been helping the grassroots citizens, and they were elected by us. The government resorted to disgraceful means to disqualify these 4 legislators. The Secretary for Labour and Welfare is here. According to the Labour Ordinance, we are your boss, and your salary comes from the taxpayers. These 4 legislators were elected by the public, so how can you deprive them of their status? You resorted to disgraceful means to disqualify these legislators. And these are the legislators who try to fight for our best interests, and you disqualify them. I strongly condemn the government for disqualifying these 4 legislators, and they are depriving us of our right to elect them, because these 4 legislators were elected by us. Today we are discussing LIFA. The Commission on Poverty never thought about alleviating poverty. You formed this commission, and just when the poor began to saw some light, they are suffering again. You talk about the Commission of Poverty or Community Care Fund. This is all meaningless. Have you thought about alleviating poverty for the people? The half allowance is $500, while the full allowance is $1,000. Well, a lot of chefs belong to the working poor. This is a bizarre concept. The working poor. Even if you have work, you might be under poverty, and you might not be able to rent a unit. There were a lot of quarrels between couples when making applications, and the husband needed to obtain proof of work, and he had to start compiling the application after 4 months, and after a few attempts, he was fired. Can you really streamline the procedures? All right, we heard you. So streamlining of applications. Next, Mr. Cheng Man Kit from the Civic Party. Thank you. I attended a few public hearings at LegCo to voice my views towards the policy. Today I have a lot of doubts and struggles. Last week, the judge, Mr. Ao, disqualified 4 legislators, and deputations have said most of these legislators are members of this panel. I don't know what members think about our views and what they have in mind. Would there be any legitimacy whether or not our proposals are accepted? If LegCo continues to lack legitimacy and popular support, what value would there be in our comments or views? Dr. Law is here with us today. So I have a few words for Dr. Law on behalf of the residents. The Secretary has heard from 4 deputations who had applied for LIFA and their stories. And I'm sure you realize that the application procedures are too complicated. No amount of study from your side would be more useful than listening to the applications themselves. Their cases are very compelling. I hope Dr. Law would assess whether there are problems with the application procedure. We support LIFA strongly, and we believe in the intents of the program. However, why would so few families benefit? The target was more than 200,000 families, but now only about 30,000 can benefit. I think the problem lies with the procedures. I want to provide some extra information, and more than 1.7 thousand families withdrew their applications, and 2,900 failed to apply for the LIFA, and these led to a very low number of successful cases. Thank you very much.
We will ask the administrator to explain why 65% of the applications were not accepted. Is it because they could not provide all the necessary documentary information, or what? Next, Madam Zhang Choi Hua, the Leaver Concern Group from Tin Shui Wai. I am a Tin Shui Wai Kai Fong. I have 2 children, aged 7 and 9. My husband is a ground staff at the airport. He earns about $14,000 to $15,000 a month. Even if we apply for LIVA, we're not able to reach the poverty line yet. Although LIVA can help us meet some of our needs, we are not able to pay for the extracurricular activities of our children. Our children can only stay at home and watch TV and do their summer assignments. I hope that the government can help families like ours to have another, protection, so that you give another safety net for us who are making 40% to 50% of the medium monthly household income. We didn't have enough money. We dare not even go out because we couldn't even afford the, the traffic expenses. My daughter has, learning disabilities. We can't even make ends meet now. How can we, cater to the interests of our children or develop their interests? I hope the government will provide some subsidies for our children so that they can really develop their interests and talents, or that they will be given some training. Finally, I'd like to say this to the officials. Do you remember, how tough it was when you were poor? I hope the government will, really help us. And my husband works in the baggage department. He works for 10 hours a day, and it takes about 13, 14. He works for 13, 14 hours if you include the transportation, hours. Most of our expenses are on our children. I hope the government can really put our interest on their top priorities. We hope that we'll be able to get the higher allowance so that our children can benefit. We all say that we were very poor when we were young. So the poverty should become part of our CV, or should that be the reason why we should be concerned about the problem of poverty? Next, we have Ms. Zhang Fuling, again from the Legislative Group in Tin Shui Wai. Good morning. I am a Kai Fong from Tin Shui Wai. I have 3 daughters. One's attending primary school, 2 attending secondary school, and my husband is the only one working, and we are finding it very hard to make ends meet. We really have to struggle. Sometimes we go to the podium to collect, food waste donated by other people. Sometimes we simply eat a bun for a meal. Lever can really help us make our ends meet. But last year we only were able to apply for leave once, and we did not apply anymore because the procedure is very cumbersome. My husband, when my husband asked my boss to endorse his working hours, he couldn't even see his boss once a month. The boss also found this so cumbersome and was reluctant to put down his signature. So we were able to only submit an application once. I once had a tumor. I had to go through chemotherapy. I even almost wanted to attend to a psychiatric, clinic. I'm not a very educated person, my husband doesn't really know how to fill in the forms, and he's not a very communicative person. So I hope that the lever should cover both husband and wife. My husband works very hard at home, and when he comes home, he gets drunk. He doesn't do anything else. I have to, make the application myself. He doesn't even bother about, getting the information and so on. So I hope that we could be incorporated into the as well. So I think asking the employer to provide the endorsement is very cumbersome. My children simply don't have the means for tuition. They can only go for free tuition offered by their schools. My eldest daughter monopolizes the PC. I mean, she's doing her undergraduate studies, and our 2 other daughters who have to go to the library. And they can only, eat a bun for a meal. So it's really tough for my daughters. But they really are very, very nice, and they've done well at schools. Yesterday, they went to school to work as volunteers, and she told me that so I think the lever is very important for low-income households. I hope the government can simplify the application procedure so that it won't have to be like beggars. And because lever can really help our children and actually help subsidize our income. You said sorry. It should be the government and us saying sorry to you instead. So other than suffering from poverty, you also have to put up with all the cumbersome, procedures just because you want to apply for the allowance of a few $100 or $1,000. It's not a lot to many people, but it really means a lot to families like yours. Next, Ms. Zhang Man, Leaver Concern Group, Tin Shui Wai. Good morning. Good morning, Chairman, Secretary, and fellow members. I've heard the crying and sort of tears of many of our Kai Fongs, and also their aspirations. I really feel very sad myself. We're having this hearing today. I see only 4 members present: Mr. Siu, Mr. Kwong, Dr. Zhang, and so on. There are only 4 members present at this hearing. There are 3 officials from the administration, including Dr. Law, who just became the secretary. Honestly, when Mr. Law took up his office, we had great expectations of him, and we have placed our hope on him. We really applauded his appointment, but would it be the case that he would totally change his stance once he became the part of the administration? I hope not. I represent my children to express, to talk about the working hour requirements for leaver. I would like the government to, remove the working hour requirements. The 192 and 144-hour working hour requirements for family members who are casual workers or families on CSSA and the underprivileged families. It is difficult for them to find such documentary evidence. If they ask their employer, then the employer will make things difficult for them or say mean and nasty things to them. Sometimes they would even lose their job if they ask the employer to help them put in the application. So although the aim of leaver is to alleviate intergeneration poverty, but because of these procedures, you're creating a lot of strife among the families. The employer may even dismiss us because we're considered to be a nuisance to them. So these procedures are really, creating a lot of nuisance and causing a lot of family discord. So I hope that the government should really consider the working hour requirements and see whether or not you could simplify the requirements. And secondly, that you should, remove the child allowance from leaver so that for children of low-income families, they should all be entitled to the allowance and that they shouldn't be deprived of such allowances because of the working hour requirements. Thank you. Ms. Zhang, I hope you note that other than those members who are in this chamber, many members are actually in the offices upstairs watching our inquiry live. There are also other meetings going on concurrently, and I hope you understand. Next, Ms. Ngai Hua, again, the Leaver Concern Group from Tin Shui Wai. Thank you. Good morning. I am a Kai Fong from Tin Shui Wai. There are 3 members in our household: my husband, myself, and my daughter. My daughter has applied for family assistance, and she's receiving a full allowance. And recently, we wanted to apply for leaver because my husband is a scaffolding worker. He works as a driver, but he also has to help the other scaffolding workers. And when it rains, there won't be any work for him. Sometimes when he arrives at the construction site, the boss will say, the weather is not good today, and then he will have to leave after he has had his breakfast, and he has to pay for the traffic expenses going home. When we apply for leaver, there are all kinds of complicated procedures. He has to ask the employer to provide evidence of his working hours. My husband basically can meet the working hour requirements. He worked for more than 100 hours a month, and the employer would find that this is a lot of nuisance for him, because he would say, I already signed the income verification last time already. Why are you asking me to do it again? So the boss is very unfriendly and felt that my husband was really a nuisance for him. And very often this would affect his relationship with the employer. The working relationship would be affected, and the boss would not like him because of that. And my husband would think that he doesn't have any dignity at all. It's all right for a woman, for a poor man who goes to work, and the employer telling him, Mr. Leung, I've hired you to work for him. I've not hired you just because I want to help you apply for leave. For a man, when the boss talks to him like that, I mean, it's so humiliating. And when he comes home, he would, to say, well, please, don't cause any further troubles for me. Please try to, don't ask me to apply for all these types of allowances. It's not for people like you to apply. So for the members and officials, you put forward very good proposals that can help people, but it's all formalities only. You're just telling us that there are such resources and schemes, but when we apply, it's a very painful process. So it's like the student financial assistance. My daughter has already been approved the full allowance. All the banking statements and so on have been verified. Why is it that we still have to go through so many cumbersome steps? Are you helping us, or are you really, hurting us instead? What you offer is very good, but it doesn't really benefit us, because in the end, we won't get it. When we apply for the allowance, in the end, we don't get them, and we are being laughed at, we are being ridiculed, and we are being looked down upon by our employers. And my daughter, who is attending Secondary 5, she's a very good daughter. We all live frugally, but why is it like that? Thank you. So are we helping you or hurting you? So that's the question you want to ask. I don't think the Bureau intends to hurt you, but some of the measures may have these unintended consequences. I think the officials would also feel very sad after hearing your stories. Next, Mr. Jo Woon Hong from the Hong Kong People's Livelihood Allowance. Good morning. I represent the Alliance to speak. I'm also a district councillor from Kowloon City. According to my observation, there is a small number of applicants for leaver. It's because the threshold is too high and the procedure is too cumbersome. Many families give up halfway through the application. First of all, the income threshold is too low, and the old allowance is treated as part of the income. Leave, for example, for a two-member household, if they apply for leaver, the threshold is 9,100. For the community care fund for families who are not allowance, it's 16,000. Transport allowance 17,000. But the old age allowance is treated as part of household income, and this is not right. We hope that the government can waive the old age allowance as part, and don't count that as part of family income. Next, the absence rule is simply out of touch with reality. The number of absence of leave day is actually killing the incentive for people to apply. That is, within a 6-month period, the applicant and the family members can only be away for Hong Kong for no more than 30 days, and if they exceed 30 days, and only they will not be entitled to leave unless that. For some of the family members, they need to go back to the mainland to visit families or to receive medical treatment, or simply to actually, cut down on the family expenses, or to get relief from the overcrowded conditions. As a result, they lose their eligibility for leave. The government should really abolish the leave of absence requirement, and to at least waive the non-working member family the requirement of the absence the leave rule. Thirdly, the application procedure is so complicated, it's actually killing the incentive for the applicant to apply, because when they apply, they have to supply all kinds of documents. The procedure is so cumbersome. The application period is 6 months for allowance. For every month that they're eligible, they'll get the allowance for that month. And after 6 months, the applicant will have to apply again. For those people who are busy at work, and it's difficult, for those who find it difficult to, gather the relevant bank statements and documents, it's too cumbersome. And even at our office, where when our staff help the applicants fill in the application form, we also find it very cumbersome. The applicant has to work to make a living. That is doubly tough for them. And for ordinary members of the public, they will not have a system compiling the financial information, and the information is complete, they have to provide supplementary information. If there are statements and deposits in banks, and the applicant have to make an explanation or make a declaration. I hope you should provide for a one-stop website so that people can submit information online, and the government will have different types of allowance schemes. Could the government combine all such information? It's a good scheme. Leave is a good scheme, but the application procedure, is such that there's a lot of red tape that you need to, cut down.
Mrs. Sarah Abbott.
I want to focus more about LIFA effectiveness for ethnic minorities families. It is still difficult for many EM families to access to LIFA. They are not provided interpretation services by frontline staff, although they notice that client has communication difficulties. Instead, they were asked to seek help from their relatives or friends. We have recorded some cases. I just want to quote one case here. Client made call to caseworker to ask some information regarding amendment required to be made on the form. Case officer picked up the call but kept speaking in English and Cantonese, despite the fact that applicant insisted for Urdu language and put emphasis that he cannot speak English or Chinese well. Case officer put client on hold and returned back after around 5 minutes, saying that ask your friend or someone else who can speak English or Chinese to call us. Her attitude was towards applicant was like, why you call me when you don't know the language? It seems that she assumed that client can speak English or Cantonese because of his simple conversation, and that he is purposely not speaking in Cantonese or English. It is just ridiculous that every department will put responsibility on Home Affairs Department for providing interpretation service, but they never think practically. Why don't they go and try the service by themselves? We always insist on this point, but every time they will just ignore our request. I just want to request the government officials go and try interpretation service that how it is practically used. And then Home Affairs Department is funding Cheer Center is to just employ limited number of interpreters, which cannot deal with each and every department. One of our client called Cheer to get interpretation service. Line was busy for a few minutes, and then call was diverted to inbox, and they were asked to leave message in inbox, but inbox was full. So do you have any suggestion that what should the client do in this situation? We want to request to provide one-stop form filling services for ethnic minorities, multi-language hotlines for application inquiries, employ EM staff to help and guide EM applicants, and last but not least, to open LIFA district offices in different districts so that applicants can easily access for their inquiries. Present hotlines through Cheer Center is mostly inaccessible. Form filling services are quite limited, and mostly applicants need to fill up forms by themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we discussed this matter, we mentioned the very low number of EM families applying for leave perhaps is because of language barriers, and I hope the administration can address this point afterwards. Mr. Chen Man-ying from the Federation of Hong Kong Kowloon and NT Labour Federation. First, I have to say that we are very disappointed with the implementation of the scheme. The Labour and Welfare Bureau is just a window dressing organization. We fail to see how labor and welfare policy areas can complement one another, and this leaver scheme is one example. At first, we're very happy to learn of this scheme. We thought that finally there would be a scheme to help grassroots families. But it's been more than a year since its introduction, but only a few tens of thousands of families, or close to 120,000 recipients or beneficiaries. At first, the government expected to benefit 0.7 million beneficiaries. So this is a big departure from the original intention. Still, we have some suggestions for the Bureau to consider. First, you should relax the application threshold. CU Hong Kong and Baptist University did a survey, and only 6.8% of the families interviewed could meet the income and assets criteria. This is something for the administration to reflect on. And 192 working hours of work, you may not know what is meant by 192 hours. Now, take 8 hours and 24 days. You encourage people to work 5-day weeks. So under this scheme, you expect people to work 24 hours and 8 hours a day before they can get the full allowance. Isn't it ridiculous? We want the application procedures to be simplified. The application form is now shortened to 6 pages from 8 pages. And the absence rule is also relaxed. Other than that, there are no improvements. They've just used smaller fonts, and you may think that things have changed. I hope the administration can really make it more convenient for applicants and do not just trick them. And thirdly, there should be more support. This council, or we have asked the Bureau to help our workers, our staff, to help people to fill out the forms. We spent a lot of time studying how to fill out the form. There is no need for me to repeat as to how unuser-friendly the form is. You may say that, well, they've already asked the people to help. But let me show you some statistics. From the 1st of January to the 15th of May 2017, according to the administration, they've sent staff to help people to fill out the forms. Can you imagine that only 380 forms were received in the interim, and the so-called support stations were only open once a month? So do you expect people to get help only once a month? So such measures are ridiculous. The government should really be more user-friendly. For instance, can the inquiry desk be open once a week? Thank you, Mr. Chen. We understand that the administration has introduced some improvement measures, but from what we've heard, the effects of these improvements are limited. Perhaps instead of tinkering with the system, we need a major revamp of the scheme. Mr. Tin Ka-shun, a concerned group of subdivided unit occupants in Kwai Chung. Thank you. Before I comment on liver, I'd like to talk about the disqualification of 4 members by the administration. So they are sworn in. Yesterday, they broke the law interpreted tomorrow. So these members have been fighting very hard for the welfare of grassroots. The government has ignored our wish. It has disqualified altogether 6 members. Has the administration respected the wish of voters who voted for these members? So I'd like to condemn the administration for such brutal behavior. There's no respect for public opinion. I don't know whether the administration will respect us who are here in this public hearing to tell you our views. Turning back to liver, I think Dr. Law might have noticed a case reported by the media. There was a family who was eligible for a full rate allowance, but because of OT work, the working hours exceeded the threshold by a little bit, and then the family was only eligible for half-rate allowance. The purpose of the scheme is to encourage self-reliance so that the harder you work, the more you get. However, many members of the public cannot make ends meet by working on one job, so they have to work overtime. But because of the part-time they work, they fall from receiving full rate to half rate. So the harder they work, the less they get as a result. So are we really encouraging people to be self-reliant, or are we encouraging the community to give very low pay to our very hard-working employees? I hope the administration can address this problem. Given that the income threshold is so high, are we really helping the grassroots? I am at the front line when it comes to helping applicants. Well, according to the administration, they provide support at various districts, but only 300 odd applications were processed during the period. So the administration provide enough resources to help the kaifongs. Many of them were not aware of the support service available. They didn't know where the offices were. Even for frontline workers like me, I find it hard to help our kaifongs. So can you have really useful ways to support the applicants? So instead of support centers that only operate on a monthly basis, can you please think twice? All right. The support stations really helping them? You were only able to help 300 odd cases in the 5 months. Ms. Marjorie, Alliance for SDU's occupants in Kwai Fong. Thank you. I am from a single parent family. I have got 2 daughters and a son. And my son and myself are on CSSA, and my 2 daughters are over 18. They are working. However, their earnings are low. My elder daughter wanted to continue her studies, but because my health is poor, because I'm the only breadwinner in family, my elder daughter decided to start work, and she wanted to make some earnings before joining the returning to school. And my younger daughter was a university student. Now she is a university graduate, and because my health is poor, she has given up the hope to continue her studies. Why can't I apply for leave myself? Because my 2 daughters are working. I hope I can apply on an individual basis. Because we have great financial needs, and we live in a very stuffy SDU, and my elder daughter has to take medicine and see a doctor very frequently, and she also has to work. I really worry for her health. My elder daughter is close to suffering from TB because our unit is very stuffy. We were evicted by our last landlord, and the new SDU we live in is just the same. So I hope I can apply for leave myself, so that I don't have to worry so much for my daughters. And I think if you allow a single applicant, it should be okay, because my son and myself are covered, but my daughters are not. I think they should be eligible to to join leave themselves, and many Kaifons are not eligible under the scheme. I hope the administration can relax the requirements. Ms. Ma, you told us that some of your daughters gave up their university education and they didn't even finish their university education. Well, my second daughter just graduated because I have to go to follow-ups at clinics, and she has decided to give up. My second daughter. Thank you. Mr. Kwan Nim from the Alliance of SDU Occupants in Kwai Fong. Thank you. Ms. Ma and some other individuals have told you how difficult it was to apply for leave. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because some Kaifongs now, this is a Monday morning, many of them cannot come here today because they are working. If they take leave to come here, they will no longer be eligible, perhaps because of the working hour requirement, and some of them cannot really come on a weekday. Now, if we can have a public hearing on Sunday, I think the number of deputations here might see a 4-fold increase. We see many unfair requirements. Kaifongs in Kwai Chung have been talking about this for many years, right from the establishment of the poverty line and also 1 year after the introduction of the scheme. Kaifongs don't find it fair because, first of all, there is the income problem. As said by some Kaifongs, how come it has to be calculated on a family basis? Even last week, some Kaifongs were asking this question: why should the whole household be taken into account? And when it comes to working hours, you do not consider the household working hours. So why is it that why is it the case? And Kaifongs find this very unreasonable. And for some applicants, their parents may the mom may want to work an early shift and father a night shift, and so individually they may not have exceeded the 92 hours required, but if taken together they will be fully eligible. As said by some Kai Fongs, why can't a single person be eligible? Like Miss Ma's elder daughter, she's working, but her income is very low. How come she cannot be eligible? Because a 1P family, a 1P household may even have a greater financial burden than their counterparts. So can there be some adjustment in this requirement? And then the procedures are very complicated. Kai Fong cannot make it today. He or she is a domestic helper. She has 8 employers. So many of her employers were not willing to sign the income proof or working hour proof for her. So she has got 8 employers. So she's required to obtain 8 signatures. So perhaps the scheme did not envisage that there would be such complications. Mr. Lee Ho-Feng, the working group, the concerned group for low-income households. Thank you. I have come and encountered many Kai Fongs who have various difficulties when it comes to application for the scheme. In one case, there was a casual worker with many employers who refused to sign for them. And for some Kai Fongs, with the same bundle of document, they might be successful in the first instance, and when they went to apply for the second time, they were rejected. They find it baffling, and there are other technical problems. And this scheme has generated many deep-seated problems. Some Kai Fongs want to be eligible, and so even though the mother may be homemaker, and her husband will have to work even though he's very old or he is physically weak. In fact, these families need more assistance from the administration. They really need the allowance to survive, but then they may be rejected because they have not worked enough hours. And then I think this is creating more problems to the grassroots.
The application procedures are complicated, and very often applicants would feel that the government is making life hard for them because they have no income. When their work is unstable, the government would accuse them of not working hard enough. So is Lever really helping them, or just something looking down on them? The government is encouraging employment, but they are actually punishing the grassroots, and they are making life hard for them. Is this really a welfare policy or an economic policy? When I was a student, a professor once told me that whenever we conduct policy research, we have to come up with solutions as well as the relevant problems. Lever is a solution, but it also came with different problems, and this professor is now working for the government, so I hope the government can solve these problems. I think we all know who that professor is. Mr. Tang from the Admiralty Low Income Group. A lot of residents told us that they want to apply for Lever, but they failed to apply. A lot of parents said whenever they try to obtain proof of working hours from their employers, they would be ignored. and the employers said they don't want to be bothered because they have no such responsibility. But under LEFA, the proof of number of working hours is required, but in reality, employers have no legal obligation to provide such proof. So in other words, it's hard for employees to show such proof. The government should either legislate for employers to provide such proof, or the government can enhance the current restrictions on the number of working hours. Legislating for proof of working hours might be unnecessary, so we should focus on enhancing the current requirement. For workers who have signed an employment contract with stipulation of the number of working hours, when such employment contracts and proof of working hours are submitted to the government, would that be sufficient? Under LEFA, there's a child allowance of $800 per month, but very often when parents fail to submit proof of working hours, they cannot apply for the child allowance and their children cannot benefit. The child allowance should not be linked to the number of working hours for the adults. So there should not be any working hours restriction, and the child allowance should be made separate, and they should be disseminated after certain asset limits are met. The government said they care about the people, so I hope they can streamline the application criteria and make the child allowance independent. I hope that the allowance should be dated back to the birth of Hong Kong, because we recently learned that new legislation could be dated back. So I think the government should try to meet the needs of the public. Last week, the government disqualified 4 elected legislators. This is certainly disgraceful, and our right of election is jeopardized. This is just shameful. Ms. Ho Ying from the Child Development Right Concern Group. This hearing is somewhat absurd because 4 elected legislators were disqualified last week, and apparently everything is going as usual. In June, Dr. Lau Siu Lai once moved that the number of working hours should not be linked to the child allowance, but now she has been disqualified. So we wonder whether the government respects the views of the public. In the past, the Alliance strived to review the textbook assistance, and it has been 7 years, and the government is saying that the child allowance now can help alleviate the learning needs of the children. And before it was implemented, a one-off subsidy of $3,600 were given to students under the CCF. So the government did do something to help the children, but after LEFA was implemented, we saw more problems. The government expected 200,000 families to benefit, but at the end, only about 30,000 benefited. And we have 37,000 children who are in poverty, and only about 36,000 could succeed in their applications, and the remaining could no longer apply after the first time. These children face different issues in their families, for example, lack of working hours, unemployment, lack of proof, etc., they could not enjoy the welfare. You are deciding whether the child allowance should be given based on the number of working hours of the adults. It's absurd, and it's against the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The application criteria should be streamlined, and working hours requirements should be cancelled. This way, all children from low-income families can benefit. Thank you. 4 deputations are waiting to speak. First of all, Mr. Chen Chong-yao. I think LEVA is not effective. Based on the 2015 poverty situation, the pre-intervention poor population was 560,000, and the poverty rate was 19%, and the application thresholds are very high, and CSSA recipients cannot apply for LEVA, and for singleton families, they can also go for WITS, and so the support for working families is very limited. Sometimes they do not have enough employment, and with inflation and rising living costs and the learning needs of their children, low-income families could not afford these items, and rich people are 4 times more likely to enter university, and the low-income families are in even deeper flight, and a lot of people cannot make ends meet. They have to live in subdivided units and do homework. Children need to do homework on their beds, and we are seeing such third world scenarios in Hong Kong, so we can see that these families need help. Hourly wage earners should be able to apply for the scheme, and this way they can meet inflation and the rising costs. Based on the latest Gini's coefficient of 0.539 announced by the government recently, it was an increase over a few years ago, and it's the highest in the last 45 years. So hourly age earners should be able to apply for LEVA, and this would make up for the inequities of the standard working hours policy, and a lot of people are underemployed, and with the threshold and requirements, and this would only help the low-income families. Ms. To Sheng-Hua from the Kwai Chung Estate Grassroots Concern Group. I represent the concern group, and I have 2 main points to make. The incompatibility between WITS and LEVA, and the lack of consultation from the government. They did not consult the public on their views on LEVA. First of all, LEVA applicants cannot apply for household WITS, so we really doubt the government's logic. So does it mean that LEVA applicants do not have to take public transport? Can they walk or swim to work? Is this a case of double benefit? The government should address this question. And that is the basic allowance of LEVA, $1,000, and for the child allowance, $800. What do they serve to cover? Is it transportation, meals, etc.? You need to make this clear, because there are calls for separate subsidies for living and transport costs. For Kwai Chung Estate, whether transportation costs $1,000 per month for most people. So would the government offer other forms of living subsidy? So living costs should be paid for by LIFA and transport costs under WITS. The government should make this very clear. And what about the review after a year? The first government review did not incorporate any public consultation. It was an internal review conducted at random. You only interviewed people who try to apply for LIFA. What about those who cannot meet the application threshold? Would their voices not be important? You held open hearing, but how many of them can really come? For cleaners or security guards, they might have to take time off to come, or they might not even know that there's a public hearing. So how can we sign up? They have no such right or opportunity. So LIFA applies to 700,000 people, so shouldn't you conduct public consultation? For legislators who represented the grassroots could speak, and we use our votes to speak out. But now the legislators elected by ourselves were kicked out of LegCo due to political motives. So after the review, if we have the LIFA 2.0, which is basically the same, what's the point of such review? I think the views have been consistent. The enhancements should be substantial and not just window dressing. Mr. Wong Yun Tat from the Neighborhood and Workers Service Center. My name is Wong Yun Tat. On behalf of NWSC, I want to talk about the threshold on number of working hours under LIFA. LIFA should not be a work incentive. The threshold should be 72 hours, just like WITS. Applicants do not make enough unless they are on minimum wage. The success rate is very low. We have workers who have to support their entire families. That's why they want to apply for LIFA. And there are workers with unstable working hours, and their employment is very irregular in nature, and LIFA can help support their families. And there are families with 2 working members, but the working hours, again, might be unstable. And these are casual workers, and they face a lot of issues when they want to apply for LIFA. Sometimes they could only apply for WITS because they could not reach 144, 192 working hours per month. So first of all, the threshold should be lowered to 72 hours. And for families with 2 working members, the assessment, there should be a joint assessment of their working hours. You would assess their salaries jointly, but the working hours would be considered separately, and this is unreasonable. A lot of applicants for LIFA are in a difficult situation whenever they need to submit proof because they don't want to bother their employers, and this is a real headache for them because they have to apply every half a year, and they might need to bother their employers a couple of times. They don't want to create nuisance for their employers, and they don't want the employers to know that they are applying for LIFA. We want to give some dignity to workers, even though the labeling effect of LIFA is not as serious as that for CSSA. We should protect the dignity of the workers. So we suggest the workers to just ask for a declaration of working hours, and they can carry out inspections at random. If certain policies or decisions can be dated back, can you do the same for LIFA, including relaxation of the number of working hours? I'd like to thank the 4 disqualified legislators for speaking out for the grassroots. We hope these 4 legislators can come back as soon as possible. From the Hong Kong CSS, Mr. Wong Waping. And we only have about 50,000 applicants. Why is there such a big discrepancy from the target? There are various constraints, and the application procedures are very complicated. So I'd like to make a few points. First of all, the half allowance of $500 to $600 of 50 to 60%. When we look at the government's figures, the number of recipients of the half allowance is very low, and the threshold of 50 to 60% of MMDHI is way too narrow, and very few people belong to this band. So we should widen this band in order to serve the purpose of alleviating poverty. For those in living in private flats, the criteria should be relaxed. When we look at the household income survey, low-income individuals in private units have to have an expenditure of 50 to 60% higher. So their income threshold should be higher, and extra subsidies should be given. As for the asset threshold or asset limits, the negative income tax system is referred to, but in UK, where the same system is adopted, there are no means tests. But in Hong Kong, that might be difficult, but at least can we exempt the elderly people's income being exempted because they are relying on such money. It's unreasonable to calculate such assets. And under LIFA, there's only one office, but very often applicants would have a lot of questions, and now that becomes the job of social workers. And of course, social workers are willing to help, but there's no dedicated staff to deal with these questions at the Working Family Allowance Office. So the burden has fallen on social workers, and sometimes we are not that familiar with LIFA or the application forms. So different service units should be provided in different districts. And finally, the government came up with different subsidies. So I think one-stop application services should be offered so that applicants only needs to file one set of application to deal with all these procedures.
Next is time for members to ask questions. Before that, I'll allow a few minutes for the administration to make a brief response. We have Mr. Wan Siu Kyun, Fernando Zhang, who've already put up their hands and Mr. Chen Chi-chin as well. So first of all, the Bureau will make a response. Thank you. The deputations made various points. For example, the situation regarding one-member household, combining the working hours, and the ceiling on working hours, and whether the child allowance could be linked from working hour requirements. And that should there be a two-tier system for working hours, or should there be one more tier? And also whether the ceiling for income and assets. Certainly we will look into all those issues. Regarding the application procedures, I'd just like to make one point, and I'll ask my colleagues to supplement. We all know that when our colleagues deal with these welfare initiatives, they have to ensure that public funds are spent properly on those in need. And we all know that very often the government would need to, for example, be accountable to the PAC of this council, and we all know that of course, we need to strike the right balance. And with that, I'll defer to my colleagues to supplement. Mr. Lee, could somebody please switch on the mic for Mr. Lee? Thank you. When we implement the lever scheme, we have spent some time to streamline the application forms already. After we've launched the scheme, we've amended the form several times already. The purpose is that we want, through the application form, we will collect information to help us make approvals for the applications. In the lever scheme, there are three elements: working hours, incomes, and assets. Obviously, when we ask for such information, for individual cases, additional information may be required of the applicant, and I admit that. We heard about individual cases, but without further details, it's difficult for me to comment on those cases. After the meeting, if there are any specific cases that the deputation would like to bring up, and if members have any individual cases they'd like to refer to us, we will be happy to look into each one of these cases and review the way we handle them and see whether there's any room for improvement. I also like to say that regarding the working hour requirements, the question was asked whether or not we must require the employer to give the to verification. That's not the case. For some workers, the employer has already printed a pay slip with some information which proves the working hours, and that would already be sufficient. Or if the worker could supply the contract stipulating the number of hours he needs to work per month. If the applicant could provide such information, we would accept that. Reference was made to the question relating to casual workers, say a domestic, helper. We understand that this is one type of casual work. And in the application form, we have a Form 007A. That form exactly is aimed at catering to the needs of applicants who are casual workers, and they will only need to fill in who are their employers and their contact numbers. The applicant, let's say if the applicant has 8 employers, it is necessary for them to obtain verification from his 8 employers. That won't be necessary.
Ethnic minorities, I would like to make it clear that we work closely with the Chair Center of the Home Affairs Department, and we have actually instructed our staff to offer interpretation services to ethnic minorities applicants in the first place. And I also want to say if any ethnic minorities need any help, they can obviously call our hot number, and we'll definitely consider how best we can provide the services for the ethnic minorities. And indeed, when we roll out the publicity on the liver scheme, we deliberately arrange a lot of reaching out services to the ethnic minorities, because it is our intention to encourage as many ethnic minorities applicants to apply for liver as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We are on a tight schedule, and may I suggest that each member be given 4 minutes so that we can finish the first session at 12:30. Chairman, after hearing the deputations, I'd like to make a response, but I don't have very much time. We've heard the deputations, and we have also first-hand experience of what you've told us. And I agree with Mr. Siu that it shouldn't be you who should be saying sorry, but it should be the government. Having heard the data and your submissions, I was late for 5 minutes because I was attending another meeting in the next chamber, and we were discussing the same issue. Very often the government would, I think Dr. Lochi Lok Kwong would know this very well. I understand that he's a very logical person. What the government is doing now is that they're saying that the application rate is very low. In the next committee is talking about very few people applying for another scheme. We have a low application rate. We've heard already it's because the threshold is too high and the procedure is complicated. So don't use this as a reason when you respond. Another deputation also made an analysis of our social policies. That is, you have to consider the consequences of your policy decisions as well. Public finance, of course, will need to be spent properly, but he said that there's assumption that casual workers may be overlooked. That is, if the working hours are lower, would you come to the conclusion that a person would get more allowance if they work fewer hours? You seem to have that assumption that you are overlooking the casual workers. But in reality, that's not the case. First of all, there won't be anyone. We've all talked about the threshold, the cumbersome procedure, how difficult it is to ask the boss to endorse the working hours. Nobody would, just for the allowance of a few $100, resort to doing all those things in order to satisfy your requirements. That wouldn't be very rational. And secondly, we all know that the market is not controlled by these underprivileged workers. They are not the proprietors. They are not the employers. So if they will not be able to cut down on the number of working hours in order to get a larger allowance, that would really not be reasonable. Of course, we agree that public funds should be used properly, but if that is your assumption, it's difficult to come to the conclusion or make the deduction that you are being caring or your policy is caring and reasonable. So there were questions asked about whether you should lower the working hour requirements and so on. Would you do that? Otherwise, you won't be able to benefit more people. Regarding the asset tax, I think you have to consider the elderly, the disabled, people with special educational needs. They might have, they might expect to have to incur more expenses. Could the officials respond? Well, some of the questions I cannot answer because I didn't understand the member's question about what assumptions I had. Because I don't have such assumptions, so I won't be able to answer that question. As to whether we would agree to adopt some of the suggestions made by the deputations. Like I said earlier, we will certainly take them back and consider them. After we've made our analysis, we will certainly share with you our conclusions. Fernando Zhang. Thank you. Many things happened last week and today we are here, and it's difficult for us to pretend that things will go on as usual. I am grateful for the chairman to invite the deputations to express their views. The 4 members who have been disqualified are all members of this panel. The work that they've done before is really appreciated by all of us. And as the deputations pointed out, they really represented the underprivileged. And many of the motions that they have moved in the past and the votes that they have cast now appear to have been, wiped out together by the administration. But I don't think that is possible. Today we are discussing the topic of LIFA. We've had several discussions already on the subject. Last time we heard the views of many deputations, and we also have moved motions. Like Dr. Lau Siu Lai, she has moved 2 motions which were endorsed. Unfortunately, we have not yet heard the Bureau making any specific response. I heard Dr. Law telling us that public funds will need to be spent properly. The public expenditure that we approve very often amounts to tens of billions. Very often such funds are spent on infrastructure projects which have encountered cost overruns. I don't know whether such public funds have been spent properly. Today, we're now discussing about LIFA. Through LIFA, we want to provide the basic support for the low-income families. I'd like to hear the Secretary giving us a response and not simply say we've heard you and we'll go back and think about it, because there wouldn't be a dialogue. You say you've heard all the views and there's no response. You say you go back and think about them, and when you come back you announce your latest position. That is not what a civilized society of the 21st century should be like. The community would like to have a dialogue with the administration. So, Secretary, could you respond to the views made by the deputations? I also have moved 2 motions, which I hope the chairman would deal with them later on at the meeting. Thank you. Secretary? Chairman, before we don't have any conclusions in respect of these issues, so we therefore cannot give a response before we come to any conclusions. Chairman, I'd just like to make one simple point. The Council of Social Services has pointed out that you now have a working hour restrictions for single parent families. That is more relaxed. But for families with disabled members, the elderly, and the chronically sick who need to be looked after, and the carer is the only carer. So how is that different from the situation of a single parent family? Why is it that you don't give any, relaxation for the working hour requirements for them? Well, this is also one of the things that we will consider in our review. Well, there is no dialect. So what's the point? Whoever comes to respond to our submissions, you're all like a tape recorder and tell us that you've heard our views and you'll go back and think about them. And then later on you come back and announce what would be your decision. So you're like an emperor who... Well, I'm not an emperor. I therefore cannot just sit here and make a decision myself and to respond to members. Chen Chi-Chin, thank you. I also like to thank the few members who have been disqualified for their contributions to in this panel. I've looked at our agenda and see whether or not the motion moved by Dr. Lau Siu Lai has not been taken out. I'm glad that he has not, because the Secretary obviously has not been given instructions to remove that. Well, this is a direction that the whole panel supports. And I think there's no difference between the Democratic camp and the pro-government camp. Mr. Michael Tin Wu also moved the motion that we should combine the total working hours of the whole family, and that you should make a relaxation to the household income limit to 75% of the medium, monthly domestic income household and so on. So Dr. Fernando Cheung's motion today also has made the same request. So last time when Mr. Matthew Cheung was the former secretary, when we discussed with him about the restrictions regarding working hours, 192 hours is too much. That's too excessive. You have to ensure that the wages are low and the applicant will work such a large number of hours. I don't know whether Dr. Cheung meant what he said. He said that this is only a reward on top of everything. So if you don't like it, you don't need to bother. You don't need to get this extra bonus. According to the document, the government is saying that 192 hours was the bottom line. Originally, it was 208 hours. That is so ridiculous. So this threshold for working hours requirement, is that still the bottom line? That is, no matter how many motions we move, it will be to no avail. And secondly, well, I've also studied social work for 2 years. When you provide social welfare, what you need to consider is to ensure that those in need and the applicants will not have to go through, unnecessary pain or shame in the application process. Many of the deputations have told us about that. That is, when they apply for leaver, they have to go through, they have to bother so many people, they have to bother their employers or their colleagues, and if they ask their employer for endorsement several times, they will lose their job because it's causing so much nuisance for the employer. And the director said that for casual workers, they can make a self-declaration. But in other circumstances, can you also, if the applicant have difficulties asking the employer to provide the evidence about their employment, could you allow them to make their own make a declaration instead? Are you asking the secretary? I think we can expect that he would give you the same answer, that he've heard you and will take your point aboard and go back and consider them. I'd like to ask whether 192 hours is really your bottom line. So why don't we scrap it all together and standardize it at 144 hours? Chairman, I don't understand that there is any bottom line. So everything could be subject to review, whether it's working hours, and everything could be subject to review. How about streamlining the procedure? Secretary? Director? The 007, it's targeting at the applicants who are casual workers. If they're not casual workers, they would still need to provide the proof. As I said, it could be the employer supplying the payslip or contract, or failing that, the applicant could ask the employer to provide the evidence or proof of the applications that we have received. When we deal with the applications, of course, we will take some time, and so does the applicant. When they apply for a second time, for the applications which come back, most of them would contain fuller information, and that can help expedite the processing time. Of course, they can accommodate your requirement, they would do that. But I'm asking why those people, that there are still others who are stuck with the application procedure. I hope you've heard the last deputation who told you that the employer is scolding her husband for all the hassle or nuisance that he is causing the employer.
So for those who are casual workers, for a long time, that's even more difficult. You talked about Form 07A. Well, even for legislators, we can declare our qualifications and nationality. It is also an honest system, and we are liable for what we've declared. If that can be done for legislators, how come applicants cannot be given the same treatment? Can't you make it an honest system, and they should be liable for their own declaration? So we'll end our first session here. We'll take a short break of 5 minutes. We thank our 28 deputation individuals who are present, and then we'll take a short break of 5 minutes, and other 30 deputations will come in. Thank you.